classes. Today we will be studying consumer equilibrium. With respect to indifference curve analysis, IC curve analysis. Before proceeding, let us understand what is the state of equilibrium. So, in simple term, equilibrium is the state of stability. Now, if you ask yourself, when are you stable? Be it in any form, be it financially stable, be it mentally stable, emotionally stable. When are you stable? When you do not have any desire to change, right? When you are happy, when you are content with the current stage where you are. In the same way, a consumer is in equilibrium when he does not want to change the preference of what he is buying. That is, a consumer is said to be in equilibrium. When he is buying such a combination of goods, which would leave him with no tendency to rearrange his purchase of goods. That means he is satisfied with the combination of goods he is currently buying. When a consumer will reach that stage, he is said to be in the state of equilibrium. So, what is equilibrium? Equilibrium is the state of stability, where you are stable when you no longer want to change your preferences or you no longer want to be in any other situation. Coming to the point where a consumer would be in equilibrium, let's understand that there are certain assumptions. We'll not go into a lot of assumption, we'll keep it simple and we'll just list the most important examples, or I would say most important assumptions that are required to study the consumer's equilibrium. So, what are the assumptions? Now, why is studying assumptions necessary? Because when you are studying these assumptions, you know that only in this particular scenario, with these particular situations, we have to imagine that if these situations are arising, then if the consumer is putting himself into this cage, in that point, whatever situation is happening, that we have to understand with respect to these assumptions only. You cannot run your mind everywhere that okay, the market is so long, such and such thing is happening, why can't he have just one thing? There are certain assumptions. You have to think within this window frame. So these assumptions are nothing more or less than the window frame that is being provided to you, that you just have to look out of this window and only these situations. Okay, so first of all, the first assumption is that the consumer is rational. What do you mean by rational? A rational person is such person who would always want the best for himself. Okay, so he would always want to maximize his profits. He would always want to maximize his satisfaction. So such a consumer is called a rational consumer. A consumer should not be such that he would want losses for himself or he is not in his right state of mind. That consumer would not be a rational consumer. Or a consumer who is making decision maybe when he is administered under certain drugs. So those decisions when a consumer will make, those decisions will not be considered as rational decisions. Rationality is when a consumer is thinking with perspective of maximizing his profits. Okay, maximizing his profits or satisfaction, you can say. Okay, now what is the next assumption? We have to think that consumer has a fixed income. Now, whatever the situation of equilibrium we are going to study, we have to think it in the perspective that the income that the consumer has, it is fixed. It cannot be increased, it cannot be decreased. Right in this situation, when you are thinking about the consumer's equilibrium, that at this point, the consumer will reach his equilibrium. At that point, the consumer's income cannot be increased, it cannot be decreased. Okay, consumer has a fixed income, because obviously if the income is increasing or it's decreasing, then the consumer's preference might change. He might want to buy more of a good and less of another good, right? He'll make his preferences according to what his needs are, according to what his income are. If his income has increased, maybe if one of the good is more towards a luxury, so maybe he would want to purchase more of that luxurious good. Or if his income has reduced, maybe he would want more of that necessity good, which is the other good, right? So we have to assume that the consumer's income is fixed, and whatever the income he is having, the entire income has to be spent on those two goods. Okay, consumer has a fixed income, and the entire income has to be spent on the purchase of the two goods only. Why two goods? Because we are assuming that the consumer is making a preference between two goods. We are assuming that there is a combination of two goods between which the consumer is attaining his equilibrium, the state of his equilibrium. Again, the third assumption we have to keep in mind is that prices of the goods are given. They are given means they are known to the consumer, okay, and remain constant. In this scenario, when we are studying the consumer equilibrium, they cannot change. Be it inflation, deflation, whatever the situation is, war is going on or anything, they cannot change when we are studying this. They are given and remain constant or unchanged. Okay. Now, goods are homogeneous and divisible. These goods are homogeneous in nature, like they are similar type of goods, and also they are divisible, that you can divide them in different units. It's not like they are undivisible. Now, leaving the assumptions outside, now you have to keep these assumptions in mind. Then we are going to study where would a consumer be in equilibrium. Now, let's first understand with the figure, and then we can go with the details. This is the x-axis and this is the y-axis. Here is the point 0 or O, which we generally keep. So, there is a budget line. Okay. So, what is a budget line? You must be knowing that budget line is simply because you have a fixed income, you have a budget. Now, within this budget line, all the combinations you are choosing, they have to be on this budget line. Because if a combination is not on this budget line, then that means that is out of your income, right? Now, we already assumed that the consumer has to spend the entire income on this combination. So, if a combination is below the budget line, that means the consumer is not spending his entire income, right? That is why the point is below the budget line. On the other hand, if a combination is above the budget line, that would mean that this combination is unattainable because the income is fixed. Now, what will the consumer do? The consumer does not have more money to spend. So, this combination is also unattainable. So, first point is we are making this budget line, whatever the combination of consumers equilibrium would be, that has to be on this budget line. Secondly, these are different IC curves. This is IC1, this is IC2, and say this is IC3. Okay. Now these are different points. Point R, S, point Q, point T, or any, let's say any P, Q, R, S, T, U. Okay. Now, where would a consumer be in equilibrium? A consumer would be in equilibrium at the point S. Where? At the point S. Why? Because at point S, budget line BL, this is the budget line BL, is tangent to the IC curve, So, this explains the first condition, that at the point of equilibrium, the budget line should be tangent to the indifference curve. Now, which indifference curve is tangent to the budget line at point S? This is the point S. And indifference curve IC3 is tangent at point S. Now, you must be thinking, there is IC curve 1, IC curve 2, they are also tangent to the budget line at point Q, at point U, at point R, at point T. Why are they not in equilibrium? So, for understanding that, let's understand further. At the tangency point S, the slope of budget line, which one is the budget line? BL. The slope of the budget line is equal to the slope of IC curve IC3. That is, at the tangency point, the slope of the budget line is equal to slope of IC curve IC3, that is marginal rate of substitution. Here, the slope of budget line, which is obviously the price of two goods, the ratio of price of two goods. Okay, the slope of budget line, which is price of X upon price of Y, is equal to the marginal rate of substitution, that the rate at which the consumer is willing to substitute one good for another, for good X and Y, is equal. This is also called as the first order condition for equilibrium. Suppose when marginal rate of substitution of X for Y is greater or less, it is P of X upon P of Y is greater than MRS X and Y, or P of X upon P of Y is smaller than marginal rate of substitution for X and Y, then what would happen? In that case, the price ratio between the two goods, okay, is greater or less. In that case, it would be advantageous for the consumer to substitute one good for another. But when there is a state of equilibrium, the consumer would no longer want to substitute the goods. So, it has to be equal for the consumer to be in equilibrium, and it is equal only at this point. Okay. So, this is the first order condition that budget line should be tangent to IC curve only at one point. First order condition for equilibrium is budget line should be tangent to IC curve, or we can say marginal rate of substitution for x and y should be equal to price of x or price of y. If they are not equal, the consumer would want to shift, or consumer would want to substitute one good for another good. So this condition has to be satisfied. Now what is the second order condition? The second order condition is second order condition. Second order condition is at the point of tangency, indifference curve must be convex to the origin. It should be falling at the point of equilibrium and not rising. Okay, like at this point it's still increasing, right? But at this point it is the lowest. Okay, so it is decreasing. Indifference curve at the point of tangency, indifference curve must be convex to the origin, or marginal rate of substitution should be falling at the point of equilibrium. Like at this point it is increasing, at this point also it is increasing. Okay, second order condition is at the point of tangency, IC curve must be convex to the origin, or marginal rate of substitution for x or y should be falling at the point of equilibrium. I hope this is clear. So a consumer is in equilibrium according to the indifference curve analysis when IC curve is tangent to the budget line BL. IC curve is tangent to the budget line, but also it should be convex to the origin at that point, that is the marginal rate of substitution should be falling. At this point it would still be increasing. Okay, so this is the point where a consumer would be in equilibrium. I hope you understood. There are two conditions for a consumer to be in equilibrium under indifference curve analysis. The first condition is budget line should be tangent to IC curve. What does tangency mean? That the slope should be equal. It should touch it wherever it would touch. That means these both points are equal. When these both points would be equal, their slopes would also be equal. So the slope of budget line is price of x upon price of y, because budget line is telling about the prices of two goods and the income of the consumer. On the other hand, the slope of the indifference curve tells us about the rate of substitution between two goods the consumer is choosing. The second order condition is that at this point of tangency, the IC curve must be convex to the origin, that is the marginal rate of substitution should be falling at the point of equilibrium. I hope you understood this. Thank you so much.